Dr. Finegan, you mentioned, well, you wouldn't make the decision to kill me, but what if I said to you, I'm not asking you to do that. If we go back to the conversation that we were having, and I was saying, I've made the decision that, and I want the ability to be able to do it myself for the reasons that I outlined. But I do take on board very strongly what you're saying. I mean, what you're implying to me is that perhaps a conversation at some point along the line when you say, John, you are valued. You may not see it. There are people who care about you. It may not be visible to you right now. There are people for whom your loss would be quite devastating, even though that may never have been expressed or articulated. And that may have an impact on me, who may feel like a burden. That if I hang around, this is going to have implications for those people around me, and that those conversations could be game changers. And I use that, I don't use it lightly. And I also think they're things that we have to consider as a committee. What leads a person to that conclusion. But I come back to a piece, and thanks the committee chair for sharing it. Evan Davis in the Sunday Times, the story of his father, who seemed to have made a very, very informed decision to end his own life, and certainly was conscious of the love he had for his family, and very conscious of the love his family had for him, and that this was not a reflection on anything, but that life had come to a point. And I'm not certain, maybe you could say a bit more about how the notion of the value of life and the way it's held now might be altered irredeemably by a slight change to the law.
To allow euthanasia access on the bases that we're talking about, where the individual judges that my life has lost or is losing value or meaning such that death is preferable, that's, on one level, it's an individual judgment that people can make, and people are, in a sense, free to make since the decriminalisation of suicide, for example, under the 1993 Act. That's a quite different thing from then giving legal endorsement and healthcare facilitation to that judgment, where it then thereby becomes a right based on a choice, based on a judgment that life doesn't always have intrinsic, equal, inviolable worth. What was a private, personal judgment, mistaken one, I believe, now becomes publicly endorsed in a way that whose significance just simply cannot be restricted, either in logic or in practice, to that individual alone. It changes the public healthcare landscape of how life is judged and valued in ways that extend far beyond any cases, no matter how narrowly we may wish to construe them. And it works itself out logically through social practice and attitudes in an expansive manner. You mentioned the Swiss model. If I understand it correctly, the Swiss model, it hasn't expanded as such because it was never restricted, in the sense that it's just simple decriminalisation and that there are no grounds that could be expanded. But what has expanded is the number of cases, annual cases taking place in Switzerland. So you still have expansion there. And I know we tend to think, in a way the current law is at a disadvantage, because we have the current law and we're familiar with it, and we can see the hard cases that push up against our commitment to the equal intrinsic value of all human lives and push up against respect for no intentional killing. What we can't see as clearly is what happens when you abandon those two principles, which aren't abstract, they're instantiated in people and the value of their lives, and what follows from that. And that's where this idea of restricted euthanasia has an artificially protective effect, screening the euthanasia rationale, its fundamental rationale, from scrutiny. And that's why it's so important to just think in terms of what are the grounds upon which we're basing this idea that we move into. What are the grounds? Autonomy, rational choice, quality of life, and they extend far outwards. And then we can see the hard cases, the other side, Canada, Netherlands, Belgium, and elsewhere.